Who's that Pokemon? It's God! On this episode of I'm Totally Not a Loser. So Werner Heisenberg, you know, that one theoretical physicist who came up with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, he once famously said, "The first gulp from the glass of natural sciences will turn you into an atheist. But at the bottom of the glass, God is waiting for you." In other words, he's saying the deeper we look at and try and understand the world around us, the more we ultimately see the necessity of God. I've been wanting to do some of my favorite arguments for the existence of God, so let's do this thing! Okay, so Disney Plus is officially out, and I'm sure all of you woke up at 6 a.m. this Tuesday to watch the first episode of The Mandalorian like I did.
Loser. Hey, I've heard this call before. I'll bet you have.
So did you catch all the references to the Star Wars holiday special? I know, only true fans caught those. It's pretty good though, I'd recommend it even if you didn't like The Last Jedi. Cause you know what, I'm looking forward to watching The Rise of Skywalker next month, and I'm disappointed in all you Star Wars fans out there who have lost your faith in Star Wars because of The Last Jedi.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
So speaking of faith, part of the reason I originally started this show was to talk about some of the cool arguments for the existence of God. Now there's lots of them, some scientific, some philosophical, some metaphysical, which leads me to the first edition of a new segment I call Metaphysical Fitness. Yeah, that's right, metaphysical fitness. Of course, metaphysics being the branch of philosophy regarding abstract concepts like being and knowing and spirituality and things like that. And yes, like I said, I'm not a loser.
Loser.
Okay, so I figured I'd start off with one that's pretty simple and is one of my favorites. The Kalam Cosmological Argument. So this argument goes back to the 11th century, and it was written down by a Muslim philosopher named Al-Ghazali. Although it didn't become popular until the 1970s, when it was made more widely known by an American named William Lane Craig. And it's actually very, very similar to an argument that Aristotle made back in the 300s BC. It's called Calum because that's the Arabic word for speech. And the idea is to essentially prove that the universe came into existence through the speech or the word of God.
According to Gallup polls, 1 in 12 Americans is unaware that the bird is the word. I, for one, dream of an America where everybody knows that the bird is the word.
Okay, so Kalam's cosmological argument can be summed up in this syllogism, which has 3 parts. Premise number 1, if something begins to exist, it has a cause. Premise number 2, the universe began to exist. And number 3, the conclusion, therefore, the universe has a cause. So that's pretty simple and straightforward. Another way of saying it is basically, if everything we observe in the known universe has a cause, shouldn't the universe itself also have a cause? And if the universe has a cause that brought it into existence, then essentially something has to exist outside of our universe. Now, technically by that logic, it doesn't have to be the God of the Bible. I mean, Aristotle used this basic argument for the Greek gods, Al-Ghazali used this to try and prove Allah, and Christians have tried to use this as a proof for the existence of the biblical God. But really, it doesn't even have to be a God. It really can be anything outside of space, time, matter, and things like that. So the universe can't be caused, for example, by the Big Bang, because the Big Bang is something that happened in the universe, and you can't say that the universe caused itself. But as I saw in this one really scientific show, scientists will tell you it all started with the Big Bang.
It all started with the Big Bang. Hey!
Okay, so we're all familiar with this idea of causation. In general, things don't just pop into existence, they come from something. Like if you had put a pound of meat into a jar like 1,000 years ago, nothing but the pound of meat, and then you sealed the jar totally tight, if you came back a couple weeks later, you'd probably see maggots and maybe other things in there. And like 1,000 years ago, the scientists of the day might have told you, those things weren't there when we put them into the jar, so they spontaneously came into existence. But modern science has shown us that there were actually microscopic organisms on that meat before the meat was put in the jar. And so these things that suddenly popped into existence, supposedly, they actually had a cause. They were actually put into the jar with the meat, just invisible to the naked eye. Like, imagine if you're walking down the street and you look down and you see a totally baked cake on the ground. You know that something baked that cake and brought it to this position. You would never look at that cake and deny its existence and be like, the cake is a lie. Okay, if you got that reference, you're totally a nerd. So the point is, causation is something that we all understand. The state of being that anything is in comes from something that happened before it. And this applies to a lot of things like Stonehenge, or the Earth's placement around the sun, or the existence of stars in other galaxies, and things even bigger than that. So think of like a barrel of monkeys.
It's too short. We need more monkeys.
There aren't any more. That's the whole barrel.
So I don't have a barrel of monkeys because I'm poor and can't afford that and haven't made enough money off of this show yet. But you'll still get the point. So think of an event in time like this paperclip, or monkey, or whatever. So let's say this paperclip, this event in time, is hanging in the air. Like, let's say the fact that you're watching this video right now, that's an event in time right now. So this event in time is hinging on something else that came before it. In other words, that event is hanging off of another event. Like, maybe the fact that you saw my previous videos were like, that's totally awesome, and so you came to this episode. Yep, I'm humble, totally humble.
Well, I know I'm a million times as humble as thou art.
But then what caused that event? Perhaps you first found my videos because you were addicted to YouTube, and so that was the event that came before that. And I'm sure you're addicted to YouTube because it was just something you were born with. And you were born because... I'm not gonna go there. And before that, your parents met because of whatever circumstances that brought them together. And on and on and on the chain goes. So all you see right now is this point in time, but every event before it was caused by another event before it, and another event before it, and so on. But eventually, as you're going up the chain, you get to the point where the Earth begins to exist, and before that, when the universe begins to exist. And so this chain link that's hanging in the air has to be hanging off of something. If you see a bunch of paper clips hanging from the sky, you're probably not going to assume that they're just hanging off of nothing. They're obviously hanging on something. Something is holding them up. You don't assume that it's an infinite series of paper clips holding it up. So at some point, you find out what that first paper clip, what that first event in time is actually hanging off of. The whole thought is that everything in our universe hinges on something that came before it. Like, you have a mailman, right? Well, who delivers his mail? And who delivers the mailman's mail? And who delivers his mail?
So do you deliver your own mail? Or do you have your own mail person? But then who delivers his mail? Is there a never-ending chain of mailmen delivering mail to other mailmen?
My point is just you have this long chain of events, and you have to have a starting source somewhere. The materialist must admit that there's really nothing holding these up. They're either just suspended in midair, or they go on infinitely. But the Kalam Cosmological Argument says that's not possible, and therefore they must be attached to something at the top.
There aren't any more. That's the whole barrel.
So that's the basic idea of the argument. And I think it's pretty simple and straightforward. The universe couldn't have created itself or caused itself, so there had to have been an outside creator. Just like if you came up to a building, you wouldn't assume that all the bricks and the mortar and everything else just fell on top of each other in an organized structure. And you also probably wouldn't assume that the bricks created themselves. And it's kind of the same basic concept here. That there was something that created this universe and gave it its structure. Now, understandably, even a simple argument like this is not going to convince everybody. And there's lots of counter-arguments. So one of the ways you can disprove a syllogism like this is to prove that one of the premises are false. Is it premises or premises? Premises.
Get on with it.
Yes, get on with it.
Get on with it!
So remember that our first premise is, if something begins to exist, it has a cause. So one counter-argument could be that things could exist without a cause. Or perhaps this rule applies to things in the universe, but not to the universe itself. But really, that goes against a lot of our established scientific laws. I mean, it's very easy to see how this rule applies to things in the universe. Otherwise, we would constantly be seeing things popping into existence out of nowhere. But I think we can apply this same principle to the universe itself. If the universe has a beginning, but nothing caused it to exist, then that basically means that the universe and everything in it had to just blip into existence. So not only did the universe, the container of everything, have to blip into existence, but matter, space, and energy had to blip into existence too. And arguably even time. Which is ironic, because how is there a beginning if time didn't exist yet before the beginning happened? Like, how do you get to the beginning if time doesn't exist, but it's kind of just creating itself? And I don't know, that's another rabbit trail for another time, but for now I'll stay on target.
Stay on target. We're too close. Stay on target.
Even the laws of physics, which bind matter, space, energy, and time all together, would have had to come into existence with no cause whatsoever. But ironically, that would contradict some of our known laws of physics, like the first law of thermodynamics, which states that the total energy of an isolated system is constant. Energy can be transformed from one form to another, but can be neither created nor destroyed. So basically the law of conservation of energy. Energy can't be created out of nothing. Same with the law of conservation of mass, which you probably learned back in middle school. Our laws of physics dictate that matter can't be created out of nothing, because inside our natural universe, that's just not possible.
That's impossible.
Point being, if we're coming from a purely materialistic perspective, that only our material universe exists and nothing else, then you have to also say that before the beginning of the universe, there was absolutely no material of any kind before that. And the materials into the universe also blipped into existence to fill in that universe. No rhyme or reason, just cuz. Honestly, it almost seems like a bigger leap of faith to assume that time and matter and energy and space just blipped into existence than to assume that they actually came from somewhere else.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Okay, so I think we've established that everything that has a beginning has a cause. So remember that the second premise was the universe began to exist. In other words, the universe had a starting point. It didn't always exist. So of course, the counterargument here is that the universe doesn't have to have a beginning. It's capable of existing infinitely.
To infinity and beyond!
And of course, the logic is that if the universe didn't have a beginning, then it doesn't need a cause. It just always existed. But again, this goes against a lot of our known scientific laws. So let's go to the second law of thermodynamics. The total entropy of an isolated system increases over time. Isolated systems spontaneously evolve towards thermodynamic equilibrium, the state with maximum entropy, also known as the law of increasing entropy. Now, I know that's a lot of big words,
Mr. Krabs, I am so confused.
but the main point is that entropy, which is just a fancy word for disorganization, increases over time. So if you take a system with a lot of organized energy, it'll spread out over time, going from an organized state to a disorganized state, unless of course acted upon by an outside force. A simple example would be like a hot meal. If you set a hot meal on the counter, it's going to go from hot to lukewarm, because that heat is dissipating throughout the room. Or to take a non-scientific example, over time your room's going to get messier and messier. Clothes on the floor, sheets untucked, garbage on the floor. It's only going to get messier over time. It's never going to get cleaner over time, unless acted upon by an outside force, like you cleaning your room. In other words, it takes an outside force for that system to go to an organized state. Even if you could argue that the universe started in an organized state, which would already be hard to argue, a universe that has existed for an infinite amount of time would have an infinite amount of time to dissipate and spread out its energy. Or, speaking a little more fancily, it would have had infinite time to reach thermodynamic equilibrium, which is not the state the universe is in.
Right.
Okay, I understand that one was a little bit harder to understand, but even like the Big Bang Theory itself, which most materialist scientists subscribe to, states that the universe started nearly 14 billion years ago.
Nearly 14 billion years ago.
That's a long time, but it's definitely not infinite. Plus, these same scientists believe that the universe is expanding, implying that there was some starting point in the universe. And again, if there was a starting point, there had to have been a starting point in time. And just like with energy, if the universe has an infinite amount of time for galaxies and everything else to spread apart, well, then now they should be an infinite distance away from each other. But they're not. Plus, there's this issue with infinite time. Let's even say the universe existed before the Big Bang, and the Big Bang was just what started a series of events. All the materials and everything were there, just the Big Bang hadn't happened. If the universe past was infinitely long ago, then an infinite amount of time must have passed since then. But an infinite amount of time can never truly pass, because an infinite amount of time can never run out. Imagine an hourglass of infinite size. That hourglass would never finish running out, because it's infinitely full. So if the universe infinitely existed, we would never get to the point where we're at today, because it would take infinitely long to get there, and you can't take an infinite amount of time. So that basically means that the universe can't be infinitely old. It has to have had a beginning. Otherwise, now couldn't have been a time that we would have ever reached.
Now is no time at all.
So again, we've established that everything that began to exist has a cause, and that the universe began to exist a finite amount of time ago. So, as Kalam's cosmological argument says, the universe had a cause. Something or someone created it.
Oh, I see.
Oh, I see. Tarzan? Oh, I see.
So the last counter-argument I'll briefly address is this. So why don't these rules of causation apply to the creator of the universe? The argument is basically, if you say the universe had to have had a cause, then wouldn't the creator of the universe also have had to have a cause? So to a certain extent, the answer to that question doesn't actually matter for the point of this argument. The point of Kalam's cosmological argument is that something had to exist before the universe existed. Something outside of the material, outside of time, outside of space. So there's more to existence than just our universe. That's the main point. So even if these rules did apply to whatever thing or person created the universe, that still proves that there's more to the universe than just the material. But really, these scientific laws of matter, time, space, energy, these are laws, as we understand them, of our physical, natural universe. So really, they don't have to apply to something outside of the universe. The thing or person that is the creator of the universe was outside of the universe, so it would make sense that the laws of the universe don't have to apply to that person or thing. And it's not a far stretch to say that whatever or whoever caused the universe to exist must be supremely powerful.
Phenomenal cosmic powers!
Itty bitty living space.
So again, I totally understand this doesn't totally prove the existence of God. I mean, I guess theoretically, something else could have created the universe. It could have been a god other than the biblical God. There could be some sort of multiverse, I guess. Or there could be some being that created the universe that was itself created. Or I'm sure there's other ideas you could come up with. But the point of this argument is that existence didn't just suddenly begin 14 billion years ago. It just doesn't make sense. Something else outside of the material universe had to basically kickstart the universe. And whether that was a god or some multiverse aliens or something else is for a later discussion. But that's all I got for now.
TTFN, ta-ta for now.
So as always, if you have any thoughts on this, or if you have some good counter arguments, love to hear it. JakeInABoxPodcast@gmail.com. I really appreciate all the feedback I've been getting so far. But for now, have a good night, and as always, stay classy. Hey, hope you liked the show on Jake in a Box Podcast. If you liked this episode, make sure you click the subscribe button below so that you never miss another video of Jake in a Box Podcasts.